Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. Well, this is technically part two of the roundtable of the many lives of the Evil Dead book that we discussed a few weeks back with Ron, Betsy, and Jeffrey. And speaking on that note, with the returning guest, we have Ron Ricky back to join us, possibly talk about the outcome of the event that went on. And then joining us today too is André Wu. Oh, here we go with that French name again. Loiselle, or something like that.
Loiselle.
Loiselle, yeah. And then finally we got Stefan Hall. Welcome, guys. Thank you for joining. I hope everybody listening to can enjoy the ride as well from last time. Just like here is part two. So let's begin. You guys are in the book that Ron here has helped edit and stuff, and it's I must say it's pretty fascinating. When I first talked with Ron with Tessa, what Tessa is she's here, but she just wants to do a couple things around here, so I'm just bootlegging it right now. So, but it's okay, it's all good. Anyway, so Evil Dead is coming up on a anniversary if it has not already passed, I believe, which it did. And we're here to talk about once again the book. And on top of that, Andre here actually did a bit in the book for like the Evil Dead musicals and the theoretical embarrassments. Are
Yeah,
you? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. What can you tell us about the musicals and the what led to like the theoretical embarrassments or however it went?
yeah. As you know, there's been a musical now for about 15 years. It's been touring. It actually started in Canada, where I'm from, and sort of went through a few versions in very small theaters in Canada, and eventually found its way off Broadway, and that's when it started to pick up. And the version that I actually saw most recently was in Vegas, and it was quite an interesting version. As I say in my article, I talk about the theatricality of embarrassment that sort of creates a sense of horror on stage. The play itself, the musical itself, has sort of gotten rid of all the elements of horror of the original Evil Dead, which is really the only installment in the franchise that I would call a horror film. The original Evil Dead, everything else is much more towards comedy. There was already a lot of comedy in the original, but everything that followed is much more comedy. And the musical certainly emphasizes more the comedic aspect, a very campy humor, and of course there's songs and dance. So all of this makes it very, very humorous rather than scary. But my argument is that there remains an element of fear in the musical, which is created by a sense that the performance itself might go wrong any minute. It's very amateurish, even if the actors themselves are professional. It's very amateurish, and there's all sorts of special effects that are quite bad, and there's always a fear that something is going to go wrong, that one of the special effects is going to go wrong, that one of the actors is going to miss their lines, that some of the songs are not going to come out the way they should. So the point that I make is that even if the musical is primarily a comedy and there's very, very little horror, strangely enough, it still creates a sense of dread in the audience because there's a fear that these very amateurish actors and bad special effects and bad makeup and all of that is all going to flop. So from beginning to end, as spectators, at least I was, terrified that this was just going to be a very embarrassing production, as it sometimes turns out to be. Sometimes it's fine, but sometimes it does turn out to be an embarrassment. And I think that, interestingly enough, that's where the musical itself creates a sense of fear more, and the fear that it will all fall apart more than in any of the content of the musical itself.
That's pretty impressive, and I mean, Just out of curiosity, is there on how many, if you know even the answer to this, but do you know how many musicals for the Evil Dead there have been throughout the years?
Oh, there's been a lot. I can't give you a number, but since about 2005 or six, it's been playing quite regularly. So we're talking about thousands of performances, some of which in professional environments, others in very amateurish environments, and the ones that are in the more amateur environment tend to create even more fear because it's even more likely that the whole thing is going to fall apart. So it has been very successful insofar as there's a big following for the Evil Dead, but it is usually not a very successful performance in the traditional sense because there's always things that go wrong and things that actually wrong on purpose. The campiness and the amateurish quality of the play is there on purpose, precisely so as to create dread in the spectator, always wondering if the actors are going to forget their lines and stuff like that. So it's all part of the performance, but sometimes it actually happens by mistake, and that's when it's really terrifying.
Mm,
It's interesting. I just looked online, and there's like 21 productions that are happening. Oh my God! And there are so many past productions all over the world: Japan,
There's
South Korea,
thousands, yeah.
Spain. I didn't. Oh my God! There's a huge list. I didn't even realize it was that big of a list. Oh my goodness. Yeah, there's in Ontario, upcoming in California, Oklahoma, Missouri, Minnesota. It's basically everywhere.
And one of the advantages is that it can be performed for quite cheap because, again, the cheapness of the set, the cheapness of the special effects, that's all part of the
Uh,
production. So pretty much anyone can put it on with very little investment. And of course, there are productions that are slightly more professional looking and are in bigger theaters and whatnot. But generally, it's a play that anyone can put on. So there's a ton of professional performances, but also thousands of amateur performances in schools and stuff like that. So it lends itself very well for that sort of environment.
that's true, and it makes me wonder how many times they even had to practice and they still get the lines wrong too. So, it,
Yeah, I think that they practice getting them wrong. They seem to cultivate this sense of improvisation that again makes spectators nervous.
that is true. Some people do have stage fright, so that's probably what
Hmm.
happens as well. Where
Hmm.
during practice it's all easy, but then when it comes to the real deal, yeah, it, it gets a little bit more frightening on stage because you want to make sure that you do your best and you don't forget the lines. So
Hmm.
there, it is true. There is that as well.
Can I add one thing to Andre? I went to Los Angeles and I saw an improv show, and it was improv comedy. And one of the actors was an actor who had played Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th. He also does comedy, and so then they asked for a suggestion at the beginning of the show, and it was a suggestion of something about horror, and I was like, oh my God, this is gonna be brilliant because I get to see this Jason Voorhees actor. Can't remember his name, bald guy, really funny. And then the whole improv team did a full, like it was a full improv, like one of those camp serial killer type films, but they did it theatrically on stage, but as comedy. But it was also, interestingly enough, one of the scariest things that I've ever seen because they were so good at playing with shadows and creeping up on these people and stuff. But then they would, and then it would break into something that was comical. But it reminded me of Evil Dead. And it reminded me of the exact qualities that Andre is talking about right now, where you're on the edges of your seat because you have no idea what's going to happen because it's being made up on the spot. It was one of the coolest theatrical events I've ever gone to in my life because it had that stage reality thing, this thing where
Hmm.
you're a little bit uneasy and have no idea what's going to happen. It was amazing.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to get to. I guess you were more articulate than I was, but this sense of you never know what's going to happen next. Unlike on a film, especially if you've seen the film 1,000 times, like Evil Dead, then of course, you enjoy seeing the same things over and over again. That's the pleasure of horror films, obviously. But when it's on stage, you actually do not know what's going to happen next. Even if you saw a production just yesterday, this one might be quite different. And it is this sort of stage horrality where you're nervous, you're giggling, but you're also quite afraid of what might happen next because you literally do not know.
And that can always lead up to the frightening thing of we don't know what's gonna happen,
Mm-hmm.
and we
Mm-hmm.
don't know the outcome.
And I think that the musical does that very well, and again, very much on purpose. That you don't know if they're going to screw up or if it's just going to be, you know, smooth sailing, and you don't know if the music is going to come on cue and things like that. And so there's this sense of humor. You know that all of this is for fun and no one's going to get hurt, but at the same time, you actually don't know what's going to happen next, and it makes everyone quite nervous in the theater.
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
going to chime in one more time because with that point Andrew they're making is really interesting. There was one time I went to see a play in Soiree Dada in Chicago, and it's a play that's completely improv with these actors that are like wearing almost like ghost makeup. And I walked in late. This was because parking in Chicago and stuff like that. And when I walked in there in the middle of the play, and again this is a play that largely is being improv. And they stopped, and they're wearing. They all look like ghosts, to be honest with you. They all look like they had died the way that their makeup and clothing was. And they're doing their lines, and they all stopped. All the actors on stage stopped, and they slowly turned to me and stared at me because I was walking in late. And so then I started to move to my seat, and then they started very slowly. Actors all started walking towards me. It scared me so much I ran out of the theater. And I was outside, and I was like, okay, well, I got to go back in there, but I'm worried now because they're targeting me. and so, in the audience was all laughing, but I was freaked out because if you have a bunch of people who in a dark theater are all dressed and looking like ghosts with really good makeup and clothing, and they all start walking to you silently, it's freaky. So then I was like, okay, here we go. I got to get back in this thing. So I walked back in again. And this time they sort of let me get closer to my seat, and I start, when you're starting to go in between people, and so now you're a little bit trapped because you're in both of the rows. And so they stopped though. They didn't start walking towards me, but they all stopped. And then I sat down. The moment I sat down, very slowly, and they had stopped speaking now again, they all started walking towards me. And then what they did is they started climbing over seats to get to me from all directions. So I couldn't move. I'm in my seat, and I have all these like ghostly figures climbing over seats, and then they surrounded me, and then they just stared at me silently. The whole audience was just laughing their ass off, just dying laughing, and it was one of the scariest moments of my life because they're all just surrounding, not going. And I just like started saying like, "Please stop." And then all at like almost at the same time, they all just turned, went back to the stage, and started doing the play again. It was brilliant. And I think one of the things that Andre is talking about, when I think of two of the scariest moments of my life, they're both theatrical events. I'm not thinking of film, but I'm actually thinking of these theater moments where there was a bit of being really terrified.
Yeah, that can happen. In some of the performances that I've seen, not necessarily just the Evil Dead musical, but some horror plays, and very often it's a different kind of fear. It's what I refer to as mortification, and I'm sure that in that case, when you were being targeted by the actors, it must have been totally mortifying because you're at the center and the audience is laughing at you, the actors are targeting you, so that is a moment of real fear, unlike what one usually gets in horror films when, again, you're pretty sure that nothing is going to happen and the film is just going to unfold like it has 1,000 times before. So the real horror of theater performances can be quite different from what we see in horror films generally.
I will say, not that it's Evil Dead, but it is horror theater related. I remember going to a dinner theater and seeing a live version of Little Shop of Horrors, and that was an interesting one because they served us a meal and then we went to see the stage production, and they did a very interesting thing at the end of the play where they dropped vines out of the rafters of this old building that had been converted to a theater, and the whole audience just screamed in terror, right? I mean, something that was kind of somewhat terror, but more comedic. But that was an interesting way to end that. And that's, I think, the thrill of the live performance, right? Is there's a script, but it's live, so you're always in that state, and the audience is much more of an essential component in a live theatrical performance. You know, if you're in the theater, there's a little bit of distance, you and the screen, you and the film. Even if you're watching it at home, it might be a little unnerving, but that liveness is very essential, I think.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I just went to see the new Halloween in the theater. I was 0% scared. I mean, just nothing about that film scared me at all. Oh, is Helen there?
Yes.
Oh, I guess not.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, she is. Oh, cool. Okay, good.
Oh, great, fantastic. Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But one thing I was going to add too is because Andre's really got this thing going. We're talking about theatricality and fear, but one of the cool things I'm really, really, really tall. So I get asked, I'm actually in an upcoming horror movie. I'm playing like the main role. It's called Flesher. I get asked to be in stuff, and I've been asked in the past to be in haunted houses because they're like, oh my god, you scare people, and so they like to make me in the, I don't know, just the demons and Frankenstein and that kind of thing. But one of the cool things, I was working this haunted house and I was popping out at people, and my height would fear that and make them scream sometimes. But one of the things I did, because you're almost experimenting, because you're doing this over and over and over and over again to people, and I did this one thing where I got up on top in the rafters, and then with my long hands I would reach down, and all I would do is just like very lightly just brush the top of their head. And then I'd pull my arm up so they would look up and not be able to see what happened. And I got some intense screams from that. And it was, all it is basically just very, I mean, sometimes I'm not even touching them. It's just the movement of my hand creating a wind that then moves their hair. And I used to get some huge screams. And I was really interested in that, about the subtleties of what can make, especially subtleties of, I don't know, feeling something, and then not knowing where it came from. I remember I'd watch people in the dark, and they would just be terrified, like, and then they'd be explaining to a friend if somebody touched me, and they're like, nobody's around right now. They're like, no, somebody touched me. You know, and even if I hadn't, like I said, it's just my hand moving, and then they could feel it on their hair. I was really interested in that, but why that terrifies so much. I don't know if anybody fits in with the stage reality thing, but it's improv. That was definitely improv when I did that.
Well, that's the part of the reality of the stage, where people are there in connection with objects and with actors, and if you expect someone in front of you, well, that's fine. But if the movement comes from behind, or if someone touches your hair, then it's terrifying again, because it's actually real. It might not be a threat if it's just this soft touch, but it's something you're not expecting, and it's not within the confines of a film, when you know that the film can never touch you, except, of course, if there's actors in the audience, as sometimes happens. That's quite rare, usually, when you go see, again, you were talking about Halloween, the new Halloween, which is not scary at all, and I agree with you completely, but it's totally behind in the confine of the screen, so nothing can actually happen. So even a scary horror film remains totally safe, because nothing can touch you. While in an environment like a fun house or in a theater where the actors can actually touch you, that can be a bit more unnerving, because again we're within the reality, the presence of both the spectator and the actor in the same space at the same time. So there's always an element of real fear that cinema cannot quite create.
Stefan, I know with your segment in the book, you were talking about the franchise fright between the film to the game, because I do also believe that the films came out before the game. So what can you tell us about either differences, or what were the certain changes or similarities? What the your section about?
Well, I think that one of the interesting things about the Evil Dead franchise is that it's a real transmedia property. I mean, we've got the films, we had the TV series, we've got video games, we've got the stage musical. It really goes across a lot of different media. And there was back in 1984, so not too many years after the first film, there was an Evil Dead game released for the Commodore 64. Wasn't very good. I mean, it tried, given the time. So really, there wasn't a run at the franchise again until 2000, and a video game developer and publisher called THQ, they got the rights to do an adaptation, and so they came out with basically three games: Hail to the King, A Fistful of Boomstick, and then Regeneration. And they decided with these to basically sort of continue the narrative of what we saw, ending basically with Army of Darkness, and the theatrical ending of the film, not the unused alternate that's provided on home video. And basically, Ash is kind of back where he belongs. Things are seemingly returned to normal. He has a little bit of PTSD from his experiences about everything, and basically the cycle begins anew. So they bring in elements from the movies like Ash's severed hand, Professor Noby's incantation tape, and Evil Ash shows up, that sort of thing. And basically they use those filmic elements to create a new sort of narrative continuity.
Impressive. Now, I'm kind of familiar with a little bit of Regeneration, or unless I'm getting it confused with maybe Hail from the King, but I mean, I remember when I was younger anyway, I played one of those games, and I just remember slicing and dicing through with the chainsaw hand, so it was always fun. I don't really remember if I really could get into the story, but it was like PC days. But it's always cool to see what game studios can kind of come up with to either continue a story or maybe do a spin-off, kind of like with the whole Ash versus the Evil Dead TV show that we got for like 3 seasons, and which I think Bruce Campbell said something about like these 3 seasons could have easily been like oh god, like 20 films or something. I don't exactly remember how many he said, but it's always that cool idea though of when it's effective anyway, and successful when they turn a film into a video game.
Yeah, these were pretty. I would say they were pretty decent adaptations. A lot of film to game translations suffer from rushed development and just kind of, or another game is being developed and they graft the IP from the film onto an existing project, and it's not really well thought out. I think a lot of people really like Ash as a protagonist, and so the ability to now play him rather than just watch him go through the stuff is very satisfying for a lot of people. And since Bruce Campbell does all the voice work, you get him really inhabiting the character. I saw him speak, it must have been around 2000 or 2001, and Hail to the King had just come out, and somebody said, are you going to do any more Evil Dead movies? And he said, well, at this point, I'd like to do more, but we don't really have any in the pipeline. But for those of you who want if you're longing for another movie, go buy this game and play it, because that's going to give you a somewhat cinematic experience, right? It's going to extend the story and, I think in a lot of ways, keep the interest in the franchise alive.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think Hail to the King. I might have to actually quickly look it up, but I want to say Hail to the King actually did was more of the bestseller, I believe, compared to the other two. Unless I'm getting it mixed up with maybe Regeneration. I know.
Regeneration did pretty well also. That one, they brought in, uh, I guess, more of the, as they went along, the series, they kind of opened up more with that playful sort of humor that we got used to in Evil Dead, and kind of that brand of horror comedy or comedic horror, however you want to go. Plus, by that point, Hail to the King had come out on PlayStation, Windows, and Dreamcast, of all things. And then THQ, by the time they did Fistful of Boomstick and Regeneration, we were into the PlayStation 2, Xbox era. So both of those appeared on PlayStation 2 and Xbox. And then Regeneration was back on Windows as well. So they only didn't put Fistful of Boomstick on to PC for, whatever reason.
Yeah, I could only imagine why they didn't, because PC is usually one of the most popular platforms to play on, and it's I guess it's just whatever. Maybe they just couldn't get the design. Well, not design. What do I want to say? Well, maybe it is in a way like the design where, they had to code everything, really. They had to get the coding right. Maybe the coding wasn't adding up, or maybe they figured keyboard and mouse just wasn't a great idea.
Yeah,
I don't know.
my guess is that they were probably designing for console first at that point, and then the decision to port it to PC was probably like, let's not do it, or we've run out of time. Whereas by the time Regeneration comes out in 2005, those consoles had been well established, and making sure that a Windows version got released would definitely help with sales.
Oh yeah, for sure. Whatever really helped for sales, it's just one of those things where it's who's gonna take the bite, as I may say. Like, and what I mean by that is which one is really gonna shine, shine, and make it more of a awareness, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
any sense. I would say, but I don't know. I mean, it's just interesting, and I mean, at least we got these three interesting games. It's just that I am, and I mean, I guess, let's see. So yeah, so Hail to the King is 8 years after the events of the Army of Darkness,
Mm-hmm.
and then I, I guess, A Fistful of Boomstick is taken right after the game Hail to the King for sure,
Mm-hmm.
which, it's, I guess,
Yeah, A Fistful of
about
Boomstick
the
starts
story.
about three years in the narrative universe after Hail to the King. So,
Yeah, and then it's talking about the battle between the Necronomicon and the Ex Mortis, and I think it was also about the flashbacks, I believe.
yes, yeah, this one was a time traveling adventure. So Ash goes to a number of different time periods in and around Dearborn, right? He's sort of stuck in Dearborn as a locus of what's going on. So he's there in the 17th century, he's there in the 19th century. He gets to interact with one of his distant ancestors who's a blacksmith, and they really have fun in the level design by using the time travel conceit they can actually really create some very different levels. And I think that's one of the things that was very intriguing with the end of Evil Dead 2, after Ash gets sucked through the portal and he lands, back in the past. And I remember watching that going, oh, where's the next movie? Like, as soon as the film ended, I wanted the next one, right? Because I really wanted to see where the story was going. So, anytime, I think a lot of times when you have time travel, people get really interested in the possibilities of that. Now, Regeneration started a completely new narrative from Hail to the King and Fistful of Boomstick. THQ kind of switched developers, and they wanted to, again, sort of kind of reboot the story. And that's, an interesting thing that you can do with a transmedia property, is that you don't necessarily have to say this is canonical, this is non-canonical. Some properties that are well established, like Star Wars or Star Trek, really, the property owners really want to say what's the legit part of the story and what isn't. But I think with the Evil Dead stuff, they're just more willing to take different runs at the character, and it all kind of exists separately, but, linked by the source material, but really each sort of thing is its own individual creation, like the Evil Dead comic books, very much their own sort of story, even though they reference the films.
Well, I think they kind of have to, just to kind of give it either that nod or at least some type of clue, maybe as if this is like a different, another timeline compared to, or something like to touch on what you have mentioned about Regeneration. Yes, it did take the alternate reality, and it also, not only did it send us back to the end of Evil Dead 2, but it was I guess the continuation, or something about what happened if Ash didn't have like a time travel thing, or
right.
So I guess that's the only other difference really between the other two games. It's just that this is mainly just trying to say, like, well, hey, this is what it could have happened if it were to continue right after the end of Evil Dead 2, which probably led up to Army of Darkness, maybe. I don't really know that answer.
Well, it goes on its own thing, but that's the beauty. I mean, I think that's the wonderful thing of the Evil Dead, is it invites all of these people to play within the narrative universe that Sam Raimi has set up, and it's like everything is equally good and fun and interesting. So, let's put it in a musical, let's put it in a comic book, let's put it in a TV show, let's put it in a video game, and see what each medium brings to the Evil Dead as it goes through these various translations.
That is true. And I'm not really too familiar with the comics either. I know there's like quite a few different ones as well, as you were kind of mentioning with their stories a little bit. But I mean, I think that's what I like about between films and games, where you can have that open mind of, this is what we can do in this universe, as long as we kind of stay true to the original roots. So it's always cool to see what we can actually do to make more of a entertainment for us, and want to have more.
Yes.
Now, Ron, just out of curiosity, I didn't see this the first time when we were talking first, but but did you notice there was a prequel, I guess, that starred Bruce Campbell and Ellen? What is that? Who is that? It's Ellen Sandwich, I think. Who is that? Ellen Sandwich or something like that. It's called like Within the Woods. I guess it's the Evil Dead prequel. I didn't know if you.
Yeah, it's written throughout the book. In my essay, I really talk about. I was interested in how. Actually, I didn't know the answer to this. I wanted to see if like sort of Sam Raimi started the horror film genre in Michigan, basically. So I just researched and I looked to find out all the films that were shot in Michigan, and I listed them for anybody who's like a Michigan horror film buff. It's in the book, but it was interesting. In 1946 was the very first film that was ever shot in Michigan. It was a Spiral Staircase that was had horror in the horror genre, and it was until 1970 till another one got done. It was Night of the Bloody Transplant. Then in 1977, you get Deathbed, The Bed That Eats, and Demon Lover. But in 1981, it is Evil Dead, and then 87, Evil Dead 2, and then by the time Army of Darkness comes out, we have the Michigan film industry sort of been set up, and I've talked to the Michigan Film Board about how do films get shot in a city, and he said the best thing if you want to have a film industry in your city is shoot a film there because now you're establishing crew, equipment, all that sort of thing, and he said the more that you start doing it, the more you start get all those things in place, all that networking in place, and Sam Raimi really set that up in Michigan, where now it's like constantly we have horror films that are filmed in the state, and that actually takes in a lot of money. It's helpful for communities when you're having films that get shot there, and so yeah, he started with these little shorts, and it's right around the time when the like I said the 77-ish, the early 80s. He's just experimenting with horror. In if Chins Could Kill, Bruce Campbell's book, he talks a lot about why they went into horror. And it's similar things that we're talking about with the stage, where Andre was talking about how you can put Evil Dead up on the stage and almost do it for nothing. It was something that they could do really, really cheap, but they also found that there could be an audience with it. And the cool thing has been, it's created like this whole interest, really passion for horror within the state of Michigan. So I'm kind of interested in actually looking at that in some other states too, of like what triggers horror to explode in certain areas, because there are certain parts of the United States that we just sort of equate with horror. In Michigan, I know that there's a really big horror film base.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah, so yeah, Pittsburgh too. Actually,
zombie capital
definitely.
of the world, right?
Ain't that the truth? Yeah, I was just curious because I actually didn't know there was a short film that was a prequel for it, so that's actually new to me. So, interesting. I have no idea if it's still available somewhere, but I'll try to see if I can find it.
Sure. If you hunt around, it's probably on YouTube. But Night of the Living Dead is the reason why we're talking about Pennsylvania. I mean, and I do think it is, someone like George Romero, it's somebody who just steps up, does horror, does it well, and then people go, "Oh my God, I want to do that." Especially, it really motivates people from that area. For me, it's I'm a Michigan guy, so when I'm seeing the monstrous success of someone like Sam Raimi, it just makes me really interested in the genre, especially because I'm coming from like mining town where there's like not a lot of success, there's a lot of poverty, a lot of unemployment. But to have somebody who just explodes in the entertainment industry, it's really inspirational. So you do in the book, you're going to see it. There's a long list of films that are just consistently getting shot there now, and I do think it's because of specifically Sam Raimi.
Well, definitely when I get a copy, hopefully in the next couple of weeks or so, my job finally started to kick in through overtime, so I just need to just catch up on some bills, and then I'll probably get your book here that we're talking about, The Many Lives of the Evil Dead, just so I can actually really skim through it. Or maybe what I can just do to hold me until I get a hard copy is just get the Kindle edition. But
just go to the library. You can have your library order it for you. And by the way, Within the Woods, it's on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube.
Sweet. I'll definitely have to watch it after later on tonight. But I know, Ron, we kind of talked to you about how you got into this, so I'm curious about Andre here. You're actually, unless you aren't anymore, but was learning that you were a professor for the film studies at the St. Thompson or Thomas
St. Thomas
University.
University. Yeah, yeah, I'm a film prof. I spend most of my time actually being a dean of humanities, so I do a lot of bureaucratic stuff. But when I have time, I teach film, and I have two specialties. One is um, Canadian stuff, and the other one is horror. So something like, even if Evil Dead is not Canadian, although Michigan is almost a part of Canada, but the play was started in Kingston, Ontario. So that's what I had an interest, of course, in Evil Dead, but I became increasingly interested in the play itself because of its sort of Canadian roots, and it goes back to perhaps what Ron was saying. There's just places where you don't expect things like horror films or horror plays to be produced, and all of a sudden they emerge and they create an interest or a fascination in that environment, and it starts sort of snowballing where people become interested and they realize, okay, we can stage a play and it's not going to cost a lot of money. And I think that it's really the reason why Evil Dead the musical eventually became a success. It took a while, but it eventually became a success because it could be done cheaply. People saw that it was fun, and they, of course, there's such a following for Evil Dead that there was sort of an audience waiting for a musical. But I think that in great part it's because of the small production value, and that anyone can put the play on and have an audience, and before you know it, word of mouth turns it into a hit. So that was sort of my interest in the play itself, was actually its emergence from Kingston, Ontario. So out of nowhere, no one knows where Kingston, Ontario is. Well, I do, but most people don't. And that was sort of part of this idea of creating a play on the basis of a film that was also not out of Hollywood, that was a small film out of Michigan, and that then all of a sudden became this phenomenon. So there's definitely something to say for those little pockets of horror creativity that come out of nowhere. And of course, we refer to Pittsburgh and George Romero, and that in and of itself is quite fascinating. And that's what first got me interested in the play itself.
Wow, that's really impressive, and I am kind of glad that you found something that you enjoy. And well, I shouldn't say kind of glad. I am glad for you. I mean, it's always good that we all can find something that we like to do rather than just go, ugh, not this again. Is it over yet?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
so, but it's, um, out of curiosity too, like before you became a professor to teach this, would you say that Evil Dead might have had some type of inspiration, or did something else really kind of catch you to go like, this would be kind of cool to make as a play? Or do you have like a favorite play that kind of just made you go, man, I really like this, and I like how they pulled it off, and maybe I could like create one of my own? Or how did that actually kind of come to be?
It's a good question. Well, definitely Evil Dead. I remember seeing it on video. I don't think I saw it in the theaters when it first came out. Um, uh, I'm not sure that it made it to wherever I lived in Canada at that point, but I remember seeing it on video, and that was quite a memorable experience, because of the film itself, but also because of the audience. I saw it on video, so it was not a theater audience, but it was in a residence, in a university residence, with a bunch of guys, and we're all drunk. And to this day, I think that's probably the best way to watch the original Evil Dead. To have had some sort of social lubricant that puts you into the frame of mind that the film is really all about. So, and I remember vividly finding it unsettling and extremely amusing. And later, I read about Philip Brophy's term horality, but it really resonated with me, this sense of laughing, screaming, and being very unsettled, but really enjoying it. And that's one of the things that I first discovered with Evil Dead, and that's definitely something that encouraged me to continue to study film and theater and to become a professor eventually. So I'm not sure that Evil Dead was the only reason. Probably wasn't, but it was definitely one of those moments when, as a younger man, I realized that film could be much more than just a story. Or I always liked horror films, so I had seen tons of horror films before, but the experience of watching Evil Dead and the group of us and all laughing and screaming at the same time, so that actually is a way of understanding film, which is quite different from the traditional sort of you sit there in the dark in silence and you let the film do everything, as opposed to contributing to the film with members of the audience screaming at the scream and really engaging in this sort of interaction. Stefan was talking about games, and I think that the film itself has this quality of being almost an interactive game, because you talk to the film, you laugh with the film, you scream with the film. And again, watching Evil Dead for the first time, it must have been around 1983, 84, maybe something like that. That's really when I started to understand what film can do to you when you decide to break out of this sort of conventional relationship of the silent spectator just looking at the film and the film does everything. And that got me also interested in theater, because that's also what happens in theater, where the audience has a much larger role to play. Going back to Ron's anecdote earlier on, where the actors can actually start chasing you out of the theater. None of this happens in your conventional cinema viewing experience.
Very impressive. Now, when you're teaching, is there like any type of I'm trying to figure out how I can word this. Like when you're teaching, is there like any type of important oh um oh God, like I guess what I'm trying to say is when you're trying to teach your students either to create the like I don't know, to create backdrop or create the props or maybe the costumes, but what's usually one of the most important things that you tell your class, like this is like I don't know, like this is the important thing, and how do they react to it, I guess, to help them improve, and if not, try to learn different techniques of their own or something.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot of things that we talk about, and I think that in a nutshell, what I encourage them to do is to be as creative as they can with a minimum of pyrotechnics, if you will, trying to get the effect in as simple a way as possible, so that, because again, not everyone can make films in Hollywood, so you have to start small, but there's a way of making very scary films or very scary stage plays that can be achieved with, again, minimal costs, where it's more imagination than anything else. And I'm thinking, for instance, of the short film that I'm sure everyone has seen, Lights Out, a little 2-minute film that's made with no money at all, and it works very, very well. So I do show that to my students, that you can make a film that is quite scary, and that works quite well, and only with 2 minutes and basically minimal investment. And I also refer to the fact that they tried to make Lights Out as a feature film. They did, and it turned out to be not particularly successful, because again, I have the impression that there was too many resources there, and they got lost in the pyrotechnics and the special effects, as opposed to sticking to the essence of what works to scare the audience. I know that Helen Shin's article is on the affect and the importance of creating this affect in using the medium, either film or theater, intelligently and efficiently, without having to rely on very, very expensive special effects, which sometimes work okay, fine, but very often they're more an obstacle to the real affect of horror than just, again, very creative. And that's, and Sam Raimi had this sense of how to create a film out of nothing. I don't know that Ron probably knows the exact budget for the original Evil Dead. I don't know, but it's obviously not a film that had a huge budget, and yet so so efficient in creating this experience for spectators, as I was talking about earlier. When I saw it the first time, it's an experience like I had never had before, and again, it's done with minimal resources, and that's the one thing perhaps that I try to teach the students. Well, I try to teach them many things, but in terms of if they want to produce films or plays, the one thing that I tell them to do is to try to use their imagination and not let a small budget stop them, because there's so many great examples, including Evil Dead, of films with minimal budgets that really manage to create this phenomenon that we're talking about today.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, you don't really need a budget just to create something effective. Just like as you mentioned, Lights Out, the short, which is very effective, and I will say that a little bit more scarier than definitely the full feature length for sure. I also thought that they tried to make it more of a scare factor than what you were talking about as
Yeah.
well. But I just think because of the fact that they really tried to make it the scares scary, I think that's also where they lost the touch rather than the
Yeah.
simple thing as the short did, where
Mm-hmm.
it is kind of scary to, you know, turn off the light to see something standing there just to turn on, and it is closer, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just more effective. And as for the budget for Evil Dead, I'm actually I don't know if Ron even had the info, but I'm definitely don't see a budget
The
anywhere.
budget, it's $350,000 it cost, but it made then 2.5 million.
Good
Yeah,
investment.
Oh yeah, very good
yeah,
one.
yeah.
Oh yeah, there it is. Now I find the budget. Yeah, of course. Duh. Jeez, yeah, I mean it's pretty effective, and I mean, I what are your? I'm just curious of your guys' thoughts on today's horror films, like with the budget being really high, and then they complain that they can't make their money back. Now, is that because they may have spent the funds in like a uh in a I don't really I almost want to say like in a waste way, like in a wasting way, where maybe they're trying to rely more on the CGI, or maybe there's not enough practical effects because or they're not a there's practical effects, but it's not like enough to really give out a really good story. I'm just curious what you guys' thoughts on horror nowadays.
Actually, is Helen still there?
Helen is not.
Oh, she's dropped.
Yeah, she it looks like she dropped out.
Oh.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was wanting to get her, I don't know, input. But can you say the question one more time?
Um,
Paul?
I'm just I'm just curious on what your guys' thoughts are with the whole horror movies being made nowadays that have like a higher budget than normal. Where do they like you know some films may gotta use like almost $100 million or something, and then they e- I don't want to say complain, but they sink their money so much money into the film, and then it doesn't really get it all back. Now, do you think that's because they are relying or using it on the wrong things, like maybe too much practical effect, not enough uh, story element to really fit like a location? Because I know how some places they charge a specific fee to maybe like shoot there and stuff, but or do you think maybe there's way too much CGI that kind of takes the people out of it?
I mean, I can definitely chime in on that. I think that one of the main problems with Hollywood is that there's just not enough risk taking. I mean, I am so incredibly sick of these superhero films. I'm just so overdosed on them. They're just and that's what they do is they try to get something that they think it's going to get a big audience, and they go with it. And then the problem is too is there's a lot of piracy, and there's a lot of people not going to the theater, so they have to create movies that they feel like people are going to want to go to the theater to see. And a lot of times that turns into quickly into spectacle. I love these films like Evil Dead, Night of the Living Dead that we're talking about. Were at the time, I mean, Night of the Living Dead. I can't imagine if I was. Was it 1968? If I'm going to the theater and seeing that in 1968, that thing would have just blew me away. Same thing with Evil Dead. I mean, the first time I saw Evil Dead 2, I was just like, the scene where he's breaking into just this little hysterics, laughing with the furniture in the room. I'm like, that is inventive. I've never seen anything like it. It was just so. It was such a great portrayal of madness to me, and I just find that a lot of these films nowadays are copycat films, and so I lose interested in that regard. But I'd love to hear what Andre and Stefan think about that too, if they can chime in on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there is there are formulas in Hollywood, and everybody falls back on the formulas and just tries to get their money back. And usually, as I was saying earlier, what matters most is imagination and creativity. And again, of course, I didn't see Night of the Living Dead in 1968. I was way too young by then. But you can imagine the shock that this would have caused to audiences that would have seen this back then. Again, because it's very, very cheaply made, but there's just a sense of creativity and risk taking, as Ron was saying. Let's just try something different, and it still happens. There's things like, I'm just thinking of Get Out, for instance, which I thought might not be the scariest film ever made. It might barely qualify as a horror film, but incredibly imaginative and creative and risk-taking and really trying to do something different within the genre. So it still happens.
But that and also there was a lot of things in Get Out. Like, I've already seen this shot before. There is some. I mean, it's great to have that black perspective, but so much of that movie was kind of copycat, and even the director had said that. He said he specifically was trying to pay homage to his previous movies, where there were sometimes there was like, I've already seen this scene before, so that's why I haven't seen Us yet, and I think it's a great title, and because it has this like connotation of U.S., which I'm interested to see, because I have a feeling that's part of the commentary. But I'm hoping he's going to go in a much more, I don't know, sort of imaginative route with it. I just saw the opening to Twilight Zone, the new one, and again, it was something where I was like, it's not inventive enough. I feel like I've already seen this before. So, and I want to ask you, Andre, go ahead.
I think you'll enjoy Us, because Jordan Peele said, I made Get Out as a horror film, but people didn't know what to do with it genre-wise, so I've made Us as a pure horror film. Now, there is social commentary to it, but it is much more of a horror film than Get Out was. Although I really enjoyed Get Out. I thought it was really good. I just watched the fourth episode of Twilight Zone last night, which to me is a disappointment through and through. Peele is
that's what I'm feeling too.
He's just attached to it as an executive producer, and he's doing the Rod Serling bit. But I don't know. That's kind of bothersome. I mean, I think what both of you have been saying about the importance of imagination, right? And we could have a big budget. We could throw $50 million at a horror film. You see someone get eviscerated by Leatherface, and they do it again and again and again. I mean, how many times do you see someone get flayed alive? And there you go. So it's those films that get into your imagination that stick with you. I don't know if it's psychological or just engages the imagination. So Evil Dead 2, I saw, when I saw that on home video, I was like, this is amazing. Like, where's the next film? There's a film before this? Because I saw 2 without having seen 1. So I went and tracked down 1, and I was very confused about what in the hell was going on with the plot. But it's not really, I don't think, if you have a low budget production, quote unquote, you are forced to do creative things. You're forced to think outside the box. And for new filmmakers, that's liberating, I think, in a sense. Well, I wanted to do this shot where this person gets split open all these different ways, but we don't have the budget for it. So how can I still, give a sense of horror to an audience? Let the imagination take over, right? Let the imagination do the heavy lifting, and you're going to make a great film.
Is Helen on the line yet?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Good.
Okay.
Helen,
Oh,
if
great.
you wanted to join in with this, yeah.
Sure.
So the topic we're talking about is, or do you already know?
Oh, yes. I've been listening in since you moved on
good.
from Get Out to Us. Yes.
Well, any thoughts on what we're talking about is like these big budget horror films that don't actually, work, and then how what films do you think actually do, work?
Right.
In terms of scaring.
Sure. I agree about Get Out. It was really well executed, and I also agree about the opening of Twilight Zone because I was still looking forward to it, and then it was the recapping, a lot of familiar things, not really opening up to imagination, as just mentioned. But I did see Us, and Us, I can't see how Jordan Peele was really getting to the pure horror and experience of it. I also think the plot elements are rather confusing, and maybe he was trying to do too much in a over a limited span of time. But I was impressed by the way in which he executed some of the key tropes. So, but I haven't had a chance to watch Pet Sematary yet, but the trailer was disappointing, and I think it aligns with what you were all saying about how it's exciting to have a big budget and a lot of possibilities coming out of it, but perhaps it's necessary to go back to the pure experience of horror as a nitty-gritty, more affective force that really hits you and sweeps you away instead of trying to create some awesome effects or do something scale-wise. So, yeah, I'm hoping we see some more of that, really tightly knit and effectively impactful horror. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I haven't had a chance to see Us yet or Pet Sematary myself, but when I first was watching the Us trailer, I kind of was a little bit disappointed just because it reminded me of that one episode from the original like Twilight Zone. And I'm just like, man, I think we've already seen it before. So do I really kind of need to see it again? So I don't know. Maybe I'll still give it a shot.
Jordan Peele did say he was inspired by that episode of the Twilight Zone. He doesn't hide it at all. But what I've been doing, I've actually been going back and rewatching all of Key and Peele, and Jordan Peele is obsessed with horror. If you go back and watch all those Key and Peele episodes, there are so many of them that the humor is tinged with the horrific, right? And this is what I think is the kind of the genius of the Evil Dead is within horror there is something that is maybe somewhat comedic, or you need a laugh, you need an outlet. You get pushed to something, it becomes so zany. You're getting chased by a guy wearing another person's face, running around with a chainsaw. And if you stop to think about it in a rational sense, you're like, this is silly as hell. But when someone is running behind you with a chainsaw, you're not thinking that, right? And as a viewer, you're kind of in this very sort of peculiar place mentally.
You know what's interesting, Stefan, is I agree with a lot of what you just said. I think it's really pretty smart. But when I go to when I go to comedy shows, I do find a lot of times that they are they're touching on the horrific a lot.
Yes,
I find that it's especially when I go to comedy clubs, much more than stuff I'm going to see on television. Because for television, they're going to just make everything lukewarm. But when I go to comedy shows a lot, and I do notice that they're saying things that are shocking, horrific. In in a lot of ways, it is almost flirting with the horror genre. So that's a really interesting point that you're making, because I have found that where we it's almost like, what are the most terrifying things about life? Now let's start talking about that. I was just watching this clip of a show of Maria Bamford, and she was talking about, in sort of some ways, that scene we're talking about in The Evil Dead, where Bruce Campbell's just laughing hysterically with the furniture of like madness. She was in doing it really in a way of just having, almost like having fun with things like suicide and stuff like that. And it was pretty intense. And now that I'm having this conversation, it's putting that in a really different light last night, because I found myself laughing at some things that were exceptionally dark, and how cathartic it is to do that, how purgative it is to do that. So, yeah, it's an interesting point.
Oh yeah, it's a very interesting point, and I mean, I do applaud that Jordan Peele got an Academy Award. I think he definitely deserved it, especially when it comes to horror, because a lot of people nowadays get screwed on like Academy Awards, and they don't get the recognition that a lot of good actors deserve. And I just think it's just one. It's a shame to have to, you know, you get nominated or something, or and you do so good, and then you just get, I don't know, you just don't get the recognition that you deserve. So I don't know, kind of weird.
One weird thing is for me is, I don't know, it's like, but I'm in the film industry, I guess you would say, and I know Dennis Widmeyer, who directed Pet Sematary. I know very well Kumail Nanjiani, who's in the Twilight Zone. I've hung out. I've seen Jordan Peele quite a bit, but Keegan Michael Key, I've hung out with him, and it's weird for me to be discussing these things when I know their backgrounds. I mean, the cool thing is people like Kumail Nanjiani, Keegan Michael Key, they're exceptionally nice people. Like, Keegan Michael Key is one of the nicest people I've ever met in my entire life. So it's kind of interesting that I'm even having these conversations where I have that sort of like intimate knowledge of them, and then getting to see them explode. Yeah, I don't know. I thought I'd add that in. It was just kind of surreal as I'm talking about it. I'm like, I'm slamming the Twilight Zone, and I know Kamal, but he's doing fine, so he's not he's not going to have a problem.
Yeah, definitely. And real quick, just to get back, since I know Helen hadn't shined in on it, about the many lives of the Evil Dead. Now, Helen, you did a section in the book as well. You were talking about the tracking gaze and the possessions perspective, which I'm assuming is like some of the stuff where it comes to like maybe the trees, and how getting bitten transfers the possession, I guess I'll say. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you talk about within that section?
Sure. Well, I'm a huge fan, obviously, of Evil Dead, and to go back to what we were briefly talking about, how horror and humor, comedy in particular, are so adjacent in their effective effects. I was really struck when I first saw that film by how the entire cast, and I'm not just talking about the human beings, the actors and actresses, but also every object, every element of the film appear to be joining in on producing the effect of the quote-unquote evil. And evil itself appeared to be kind of a character in and of itself, because of, just like you said, the trees, or the movement of the camera, the swishing sound of the wind, and the dynamic interaction between all of them. So I was trying to get at that, about how the cinematography and the make of the film itself, as a mechanism unto itself, was kind of a possessing force. And I often think the effect of horror has so much to do with not just scaring people, or upturning things, or absurdity, or conveying meaning, but something as a sheer experience. And in that sense, Evil Dead does such a wonderful job. It just pulls you in. It makes you ride the gaze of the evil and embody it and enact it and perform it in a way. So every time I rewatch it, it just sweeps me up and takes me on that ride. And I think that was one of the most powerful elements there, even the comedic moments, right? Because when you're part of that whole execution, you can really experience what's funny. Just like you said, having somebody chasing after you with a chainsaw. I mean, that experience is just so something that touches you down to the bone. And in order to be really part of it, I think the way in which the film is made is really important, not just the content or idea or plot. So, again, I was really drawn to the make of the film in that sense. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's just always fascinating, and always going back to it. It just amazes me of what they could actually get away with back in the 19 well actually, Ron, do you know when it actually started shooting? I forgot the
80s.
original, the 80s. It was
1980.
1980.
They're talking about it. In '79 they're talking about it, but for I remember it's really '80. It was a long, exhausting shoot. I read about it in my essay too about how they're doing it in Tennessee, but they just don't have so much of it done. They run out of time. They run out of money. They're like, oh my
Yeah.
God, we got a half-finished film. Now we got to try figuring this out. I was so intrigued that there is no basement in Tennessee. There was no basement there. That's all fake. They had to go back to Michigan and then use a basement in Marshall. So that is, to me, is brilliant. That they're just pretending that they're digging a hole, pretending that there's a basement underneath. That's low budget filmmaking. This what Stefan was talking about earlier. I love low budget filmmaking because it's the same with hip hop. I actually like it when they can't swear, because now they got to come up with a different line. Some of my favorite Eminem lines are his radio edit versions where he couldn't say the swear words, so he has to come up with something else. The other thing he comes up with is absolutely brilliant. So yeah, there's a lot in the movie that's a bit like that. And the thing that I was interested to tie in with what Helen was saying is that opening shot of Within the Woods that you were talking about, the early Ellen Sandwich one, is showing how he's already immediately, even at that young age where I think he's a teenager, he's interested in that camera movement and how that can pull you right into the film, and that shot is almost the exact same shot that we get in Evil Dead, that he's doing as the opening of Within the Woods. Yes, Raimi is a really, really intelligent filmmaker. The way that he uses the camera to pull you into the narrative.
Oh yeah, and kind of like to shine on like what Betsy even was talking about when we were talking with all you guys too. I remember when Betsy was saying we're even lucky to even have the Evil Dead today because of the fact that they ran out of money and stuff like that. Or yeah. So, and all the stuff that they had to go through, and they didn't have trailers and stuff, and oh man, I mean, I applaud everybody that went through it and actually made it successful. So, and when they didn't think it was going to be out and about, so we're pretty lucky. And to also not forget for I can shine in too. So Helen, you're also a professor as well, just like Stefan as well, which I'll get back to too. But well, everybody's almost a professor here. Maybe Ron is too. I forget now.
I would be the correct term for me is almost a professor.
Almost. Okay.
I'm not.
But no, Helen, you're actually a professor of English, cinema, and media arts. And you have like an Asian studios at Vanderbilt, I think, university. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Oh, no, not really. I'm at Vanderbilt, and actually, Vanderbilt is in Tennessee, since we were talking about Tennessee, Nashville, and I am part of Asian Studies as well. My primary department's in English, but I'm also affiliated with Cinema, Media Arts, and Asian Studies, so it's kind of like being in 3 departments. Yeah.
Nice. And going back to Stefan real quick, you're the professor. Let me pull this up one more time again. Okay, yeah, you are the associate professor of the communication at High Point University, where you teach courses in game and interactive media design.
Yes.
Now I don't want to say, did the Evil Dead inspire you to want to kind of take off into a career like that to teach of the game design in, or like what made you want to teach something like that? Because I mean, game design is always really cool, and interactive media design. I'd like to hear more about this.
Well, just I mean, in a very brief summary, influential movies I saw growing up, definitely Evil Dead 2. I'm going to throw Star Wars, Heavy Metal, Conan the Barbarian, Tron. I mean, I could go on and on, right? Highlander, all that sort of stuff. But for me, I've always been interested in narrative. I've always been interested in storytelling. So my teaching career, I started off as an English teacher. I did that for a number of years, and then I realized my students were watching more movies and reading less books. So I said, well, I love movies too, so let me learn more about filmmaking. And so I jumped to teaching film. And I did that for a number of years, but all along the way, I kept playing video games. I kept researching video games. I kept writing about video games because there's a lot of crossover in the digital technologies that video game companies and now film companies use. And then I just sort of slid into teaching game and interactive media design. But I think the whole time I've always been chasing the way that narrative is enacted through different media. And that's, again, one of the things that's really super cool about the Evil Dead franchise is that they've tried, we've got the film, we've got the television show, we've got the musical, we've got the comic books, we've got the video games. I mean, they're really willing to take this property into a lot of different areas. And that's always very exciting when creators like to do that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And just out of curiosity, did you yourself have learn or to create the the in-game game design, or did you actually take any type of courses or online class or YouTube videos or something to kind of learn how to go about game designing, or did you?
I mean, I took some courses, but I don't know. I'm the son of an engineer, so we had a computer in the house from a very early age, like back before computers were a common thing. I convinced my parents to buy me an Atari. Like, this is going to be huge, you don't understand. And I was like 10 years old, and very entranced by this new medium that had shown up. So, it's part of it's just a little bit of on the job training. Part of it's my own interests and what I picked up along the way. I mean, God, I remember learning HTML, Nobody learns HTML anymore. An editor does it for you, right? I mean, so in our game courses at High Point University, we use the Unreal Engine, which is done by Epic Games. Everybody probably knows about them because of Fortnite now. Fortnite's everywhere you turn around. They're here in North Carolina. They're over in the Research Triangle. I'm in the Triad. And we had a couple guys from Epic come to our game lab a few months ago, and they were talking, and they said 50% of their business now is Unreal Engine being used by Hollywood. So they made this game engine, but because of all the stuff you can do in it, it's now Hollywood is using it to create CGI and all this other cool stuff. So the two industries are converging,
That is true. That's true. And I mean, as much as I would rather prefer practical effects over CGI, but I completely understand when there is really ridiculously hard shots to make that you cannot do with practical effects, then I would say, okay, CGI is the only answer. And but then again, CGI to me is in a way game design. It's kind of weird for me to say it like that. I probably, but it kind of is. You're kind of doing well. I wouldn't know for sure, but you're probably in the way creating CGI as you would like a game design, as in a character, background, whatever. Really.
Oh, absolutely. Level design, character design. I think I'm with you in that I think practical special effects are awesome, and I would never go 100% CGI in a film. I always want to see some practical effects, but if you're, doing level design in the background, then it can really help do things. It's also a safety issue, too. I mean, you can have a character get impaled and stabbed and shot and all these things, and you can use digital effects for that so that the actor is never put in harm's way. There's still something very nice about seeing someone really burning. There's a stunt person in there, really on fire, and I don't know. As good as the CGI gets, our eyes still can kind of pick up the differences between the two. So, but we could have to like loop back to something we were saying earlier. We could have the biggest, best budget in the world for CGI, and if we have a crap script, it's just not going to be good. And if we're relying too much on, as Ron was saying, spectacle to attract viewers rather than trying to tell a good story, our film is only going to be but so successful.
Oh yeah,
I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask a really quick question, Andre. Is there the same problems in Canada for Canadian horror or Canadian film in general? Oh, it is.
Yeah, there is, although it's not the same extent as in the States, obviously, because even a big budget in Canada is a relatively small budget by Hollywood standards. So, but there is a sense that the better films are the ones that are actually still made with not necessarily a shoestring budget, but where the budget does not easily allow you to do whatever you want, so you have to come up with more imaginative ways, and that still is sort of the dominant practice in Canada. But there is a number of films, as a matter of fact, that are unrecognizably Canadian. They really look like Hollywood films, and those tend to be the higher budget. And the only way you can tell them apart from Hollywood films is that they generally don't quite have the same quality as CGI, for instance. So it's just a little bit cheaper, but they try to move in that direction, and those tend to be the films that fail, because on the one hand they lack the imagination of the smaller films, and on the other hand they can't quite make it as big Hollywood blockbusters. So they sort of a lose-lose situation. And definitely we have the same thing with a guy like Cronenberg, for instance. In my view, he made his best films when he had absolutely no money, and now of course he doesn't really make horror. He hasn't made horror in quite a while. But it seems like the more money Cronenberg has, the less interesting his films are, because he doesn't use his imagination the same way as he did with things like Shivers or The Brood, for instance, where he really had to make do with very small budgets. But those films, in my view, work a lot better than his more recent stuff.
But Andre, to touch on what you were talking about with the Canadian films, for some weird reason, I actually have a physical copy of a Canadian film called UKM, which is like the ultimate killing machine.
Oh,
and yeah, exactly, exactly. And it's very. I think I keep saying that that's a very interesting film. I don't really know how else to even tell anybody. It's just that if you can see it, it's very interesting.
Interesting is one way of putting it. I guess.
Another cool movie that I've seen throughout Canada is what is it called? Darken. And I know they did like a mini internet series for the full length feature that they did. And then what was the other one? I was just recently talking about it.
Yeah. That one doesn't ring a bell. The one you just mentioned, Darken, doesn't.
Darken.
I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Check out darkenprovides.com to learn.
Okay, I'll look it up.
And then the last one that I was recently talking about is called, well, everybody probably knows it now. It's called The Void. And that was shot up in Canada. which I thought was very interesting, and another good practical effects film right there, without really any CGI. If with a little, I should say, actually.
It's actually
well, if we want to talk, just to mention, just to loop this back to Evil Dead and specifically Sam Raimi, and we want to talk about budgets. So, we get the Spider-Man trilogy, and then he does Drag Me to Hell, and then the last film he directed was Oz the Great and Powerful, which was a huge budget, and I don't know about the rest of you, but kind of a hot CGI mess, right? So I think the last thing he directed, he did do the El Jefe episode of Ash versus the Evil Dead, right? So I think he may have realized that, having a huge budget can work against you as a director.
Except I think that made the most money out of anything he's ever done, though, right?
Oz?
Right.
Yeah. There's, you know what? No one has written a book about the many lives of Oz the Great and Powerful. I can tell you that.
Oh, I'm not at all saying it's a good film. I'm just saying I think it made a lot of money. And the reason why is like Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland is a piece of crap. It made a ton, and it's because you're doing it's just easy to sell. It's Alice in Wonderland. And it's the same thing with the Oz books. They just sell. So sadly, it's a bad movie, but it did really well globally.
Oh yeah,
that's kind of the pain in the butt about the industry.
I guess the only thing I have left to ask real quick for you, Andre, is how were you approached to write a little essay for the book, The Many Lives of the Evil Dead?
That's a good question. I have vague recollection that there was a call out that Ron sent, and I responded to it. Primarily because I was already interested in the play. I wanted to write something on the musical, and it was a happy coincidence that all of a sudden there was this call for contributions to a book on the Evil Dead, so I just proposed something. At the time it was probably a very, very brief abstract because I didn't really know where I'd be going, but it was just for me a happy coincidence that I wanted to write on this musical, and lo and behold there was this project on the franchise, so I just submitted something, and thank you, Ron. He accepted my proposal, and the rest is now in a book that actually looks very good. I read Helen's piece, and I was very very impressed with the especially the reference to how the camera embodies evil. I thought it was very interesting. I still have to read Stefan's article, but I'll get to it at some point. But I think that it looks like a very, very good collection from the few chapters that I've read so far, including mine, obviously.
Nice, very good. Stefan, is that kind of like the same way with you? How you got involved with the book? Did Ron call you, or did somebody else call you?
I saw the call for papers go out, and I was like, well, this is awesome because I'm, I love the Evil Dead, and I thought I really haven't seen anyone write about the Evil Dead games. And for people who are fans of the, if you do like a Venn diagram of, Evil Dead fans who've seen the movie, who's played the games, that's probably a much smaller sort of cross-section. But I think that the horror genre, like science fiction, like fantasy, tends to get people who follow properties, right? So if you are a fan of Hellboy, the comics, you're going to go see the movie, you might play the game, you might watch the animated films, you might buy the action figures, you're going to go meet, the actors at cons, that type of stuff. So some of these genres, really, the fandom is quite intriguing. So as both a fan and an academic, I said, this is a no-brainer. I gotta throw a proposal Ron's way, and he accepted it, and the rest is now history.
Yeah, one of the things I did is I wanted to make sure it was people who are actually from places that are affiliated with the Evil Dead franchise. So I got somebody who was writing from Christchurch, New Zealand, somebody writing, Ontario, Tennessee, North Carolina, Michigan. That was important to me. I don't know why. Jeff, when he edited, he opened up to everybody, but I really wanted people specifically from places that were Evil Dead affiliated. And they're great essays. I have to say that. Really good writing. I'm pretty impressed. Very intelligent, people. So that's been really fun to be able to have such really smart writing about the Evil Dead. So I was just rereading it again, and I really liked it. Yeah, everybody did a great job. And one last thing, Spider-Man is, of course, what made the most money for Sam Raimi. It's after the Spider-Man films, then it's Oz the Great and Powerful. Just fact checking, but of course, Spider-Man. Oh my God, that thing made a ton, almost like $1 billion worldwide.
Oh yeah, Spider-Man will always be Spider-Man. But anybody doesn't have anything else to say, then I guess I'll just wrap it up and just say thank you guys for coming in to talk about the many lives of the Evil Dead again. And actually, real quick, Ron, so how did that event turn out for your book signing?
Oh my goodness! It was 2 hours of signing in Los Angeles, and Betsy Baker. It was like seriously 2 hours of signing for her. So it was like she got mobbed a little bit. It was at Dark Delicacies, Home of Horror, which is a great bookstore. If anybody's a horror fan, you should definitely go there. I had breaks, so it was fun for me. But I mean, it was kind of like nonstop for her. So but I think she likes it. It was just, I think. And I asked them what was the biggest turnout they've ever had in the history of their store, and they said, biggest turnout. Actually, who do you think it is for horror? Who do you think the biggest line was? And they get everybody there. Throw a guess out, Paul. Who do you say?
I'm not sure.
Stephen King?
What's that?
Oh, biggest horror turnout, Stephen King? No.
Well, that's the only person they haven't got. She said they've gotten everybody but Stephen King. But actually, Bruce Campbell. Bruce Campbell's absolutely packed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. He was in town, too, when he was at the Monster Palooza. But, yeah, it went great. And, Betsy Baker is, like, just a sweetheart. She's just so nice. And then we had William Vincent, who's the fake Shemp, who's there, too, and then me and the co-editor. I'm really hoping to set up something North Carolina side, Tennessee area for Halloween.
Yeah,
a little
that'd
bit
be
too
fun.
early. I'm finding. Yeah, it's a little bit too early. I'm finding the book. They're kind of wanting me to get a little bit close because that's kind of a bit far off. So I think this summer I'm going to try to finalize it with. But it's fun. I love this. I was telling you this last time, Paul. Is like horror people are great. They're just like nice people. There's something sort of relaxing to people who are into horror. It sort of surprised me, but I mean, even when we were signing all the books, the people came up to me were just like the nicest people. They'd have some like the shirt of somebody being killed on it, but then they would be the sweetest, like the most polite human beings.
Oh yeah, I find the horror community to be one of the most friendliest type of community, more than any type of community out there, to be honest. Like, I mean, I don't think I've ever ran into any fan that was just like, oh, you don't like this album? I'm gonna fight you. Or like in this case, it would be like, oh, you don't like this horror album? Or I mean, horror album. Well, in this case, yeah, I guess you could talk of like soundtracks. You don't like this favorite soundtrack by this guy? You don't like this movie? Like what the hell? Meet me outside in 5 minutes. Like, we don't get that. It's just like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, like we can go on about like, yeah, well, I like it because of the practical effects or whatever. But I mean, it's just always nice that the horror community does not shove word down our throats, I guess.
But yeah, thank you very much for having me on the podcast, not once but twice, and just thanks to everybody. I do got to get going now though, but I do appreciate it very, very much. Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you very much.
Hey, you're very welcome. And if you guys ever need to come back on to talk Evil Dead, you're more than welcome to.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And on that note, guys, thank you so much for listening. And as always, make sure you stay scary.